Hey, Black Belt Reads. Back with a recap. It's been a while since I've done one of these recaps. This will be my January 2025 recap. I've got zombies, puppets, a god complex, narcissism, a sacrifice, Satanism, and a sweet, sweet kiss from Mother. So let's get into it. We'll start off right here with How to Sell a Haunted House, Grady Hendrix. This is the one where I referenced puppets. I had no idea this was going to be about puppets. I had no idea. I've read like 4 Grady Hendrix books at this point. I really like his style. If you want very light horror, kind of funny, kind of nostalgic feeling, Grady Hendrix is for you for sure. He goes to some really dark places, but just the way he writes is very just sort of light and almost comical in some ways. This one, not so much. The puppets are a little comical, but it's a little misleading. How to Sell a Haunted House. So I thought it was going to be about a scary haunted house. And there's a house in it, but it's not really about the house. It's about the puppets. I'll say there's a couple of scenes in this book. So there's a scene, no spoilers for any of these books, but there is a scene where someone gets a needle put through their eyeball. Grady Hendrix does this in all of his books. There's just a couple of moments that it's like seared into my brain. My Best Friend's Exorcism with the Worm, if you've read that, Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. There's the scene with the vampire. You'll know what I'm talking about if you've read those books. This one, there's a needle through an eyeball, which is really, really horrifying. The character is trying to blink, and her eyelid keeps hitting the needle. So that was pretty rough. But for me, the worst part, there's a character that gets his arm sawed off with like an electric saw, and it was so uncomfortable. I mean, it made me feel ill reading it. It was very effective. Maybe I was just in the right headspace in that moment. It was bad. I'm like, I couldn't shake that feeling. Oh, just imagine getting your arm sawed off, and it goes on for pages, and it's horrifying. But yeah, the horror, it's not too crazy in this book. This is definitely more of a creepy puppets. If you're into puppets, this has some really creepy puppets in it. So I'll leave it at that. Not so much haunted houses, though, if that's your thing. All right, so next up, Satanism. Why did I say that? Well, it's because I read Whisper Down the Lane. I didn't really know what the book was about. The title is very fitting after you read the book. It's about like the satanic panic from the 80s, but it's almost like a historical fiction because that's a real thing that happened where children were sort of pressured into saying that their teachers were abusing them in satanic rituals. It's a really, really crazy story. You can look it up. It's really wild. This was sort of a take on that in a fiction novel, and it was really well done. So Whisper Down the Lane. It's kind of like that game Telephone, where you whisper something in someone's ear, and then as it goes down the line, eventually when it gets to the end, it's not even what it started out to be. That's another way of saying that. Whisper Down the Lane. I'd never heard that before, but now you know why the book is called that, because these kids, you know, they're just regular kids with regular problems, and the parents sort of take it to this level that is totally out of their control. You're a little kid and your mom's like, did your teacher touch you? And it's like, you are confused, You're like, yeah, I think you just want your mom to be happy, so you tell her what you think she wants to hear, and it just explodes into this huge situation. So this was a really interesting take on that. If you're into like historical fiction kind of horror, there wasn't any like really really horrifying, scary moments. It was just a really good sort of play on that situation that actually happened. All right, so next up, a god complex. I had so many people tell me, dude, you got to read Frankenstein. So it's one of those books. I just never got around to it. I always heard, hey, it's a classic, but it's really well done. It's really good. It holds up. And it definitely did. It was really enjoyable. There were, some moments that dragged because it's literally from the 1800s, right? But man, considering it's that old, it was absolutely beautifully written. First of all, the writing's gorgeous, completely enraptured by some of the phrases, the words, just the way it's written. And the story itself, it went to places that I didn't really think it was going to go to. You think of Frankenstein and the movies, and that's really not what this book is like at all. This is even the picture of Frankenstein on the cover is nothing like what you would expect when you think of that sort of big blockhead with the bolts in his head. This is actually more faithful to what I would imagine in this book. Frankenstein's monster is created by body parts. He's horrifying, right? But he's also just born into this world, knows nothing. Everyone hates him, and he's just trying to figure out what this life is. And it was really beautiful, really heartbreaking. He tries and tries and tries to be a part of this world and to be loved and to love, and just keeps getting rejected just because he's ugly, basically. So there's a lot to take from that. Yeah, man, society sucks sometimes, but at the same time, he's like a monster. When you see him, you're scared because he's freaky looking, and he just says, "Okay, you want me to be a monster? I'll be a monster," and he just goes off the deep end and starts murdering people. It's so good. It's really good. Um, Blew through this one in just a few days, honestly. The next one that I'm going to talk about here in a second, it did not take me a few days, but this one, yeah, it just took me, like a week to read. It was good, really, really good. All right, I'm going to throw a graphic novel on the list. It is going to be a sacrifice. It's going to be The Sacrificers by Rick Remender. The series just came out last year, I believe. I read the first trade. Well, I just read the second trade that just came out. And I heard that he's already putting out a deluxe hardcover, which I'm definitely going to get. That's why I don't have a copy in my hand, because I read them digitally. And I will definitely get the hardcover when it comes up, because The Sacrificers was so good. It was really, really good. If you are into gods sacrificing people for their vitality, that's basically what this is about. Um, Kind of a spoiler. It's called The Sacrificers. I mean, come on. You kind of get that in the first issue. But where it goes from there it gets really interesting. It's almost like you have a character that goes full like God of War, Kratos on these gods. It gets really fun. You have a shift in power. You have a character who's extremely weak and a character who's extremely strong, and they swap. They get switched, and that's a really interesting take. So the weak character has been fueled his whole life by this rage of being weak and unwanted, and this other character has been pampered and so strong their whole life that they now have to figure out how to exist when they don't have these powers. Really good. Highly recommend Rick Remender. Pretty much everything he writes is good. Uh, yeah, The Sacrificers. Narcissism. All right. The Picture of Dorian Gray. One of those classics that everyone said is great. You got to read it. And they were right. Again, I feel like I source my opinions from very credible places. And yes, again, proven correct. The Picture of Dorian Gray. It was it was great. Again, beautifully written. Really, really beautifully written. One, maybe the shortest book on my list. I read this one again in just a few days. This was great. A sort of young, beautiful man who sort of finds himself in all the kind of upper class parties and associating with the rich and powerful. One of his friends paints a portrait of him, and this portrait is so beautiful. He looks at it and he's like, "Dang, this captured me in my purest, most beautiful moment, and it's all downhill from here. I will never again be this beautiful." And of course, there's Lord Henry, a friend of these people who has all these very sort of strong opinions on life and these philosophies that are really interesting. He was probably my favorite character in the book because I've had friends like that before. They would talk to you about stuff and you just can't help but be like, yeah, man, what the hell? And he's like influencing this guy. There's a lot of themes of influence and, of course, like narcissism and stuff. But Dorian Gray, I mean, he just goes off the deep end. In order to preserve his beauty, it goes into a supernatural place, which I didn't really expect. I don't know why I didn't expect that. I just didn't. This is such an old book. I don't feel bad talking about it. The painting starts to deform, and Dorian Gray keeps his beauty throughout the years, whereas the picture deteriorates. But Dorian is a horrible, horrible person. He's a murderer. He's awful. But I didn't expect it to be so dark, to go to so many awful places. So, highly enjoyed this one. If you like classics that aren't very challenging, this one wasn't challenging at all, really. But the themes are there, and it's very dark if you're into dark literature. Okay, just a couple more books. So, I'll just briefly mention Death Troopers. I read Star Wars Death Troopers. It's what spurred me to do that Star Wars video that I did. Thank you, anybody that watched that one. Appreciate it. I'm a huge Star Wars fan, so I don't know, I was in a Star Wars mood. I don't really know why. I just woke up one morning and wanted to make a Star Wars video. But Death Troopers was really fun. Star Wars zombies. Yeah, that's basically all you need to know. It's got lots of new characters that you'll like a lot in the book. And it's also got a couple of characters that you know very well from Star Wars that you don't expect to see here, and it's really fun when it happens. Highly recommended. If you like Star Wars, even if you don't like Star Wars that much, it's still just a good like zombie space horror book. Okay, the last one. So you're probably wondering like, what in the world? You had all these dark themes like Satanism and murder, and then the last one you said a sweet kiss from mother. It's because I read Swan's Way. I want to challenge myself this year and read challenging books, and this is what I grabbed. People say Marcel Proust is like one of the greatest writers of all time, some of the most beautiful writing you'll ever read. And they were right, man, especially like the first couple of chapters. I was like, oh man, I'm in for a wild ride because the first couple of chapters were so beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Like, I almost just want to go back and just read the first couple of chapters again. You've got Marcel, a young boy who just wants the attention of his mother. And hey, I'm sure we've all been there. Uh, young boys, your mom's your best friend, you know? They have all these guests for dinner, and anytime guests come over, his mother won't come up to kiss him goodnight. When it's just them, every night his mother will come up to bed and just kiss him on his cheek and tell him goodnight. And it's like the highlight of his day. He just loves it. He loves the affection of his mother. He loves his mother so much. But when there's guests over, she'll stay down with the guests. She won't come up. So he starts to plot these little things of getting his mother up there. It's very, very beautifully written, very sweet. This is a extremely light, like slice of life book about a young boy in France. way back in the day. It's called Swan's Way because when Marcel and his family leave the house, there's a couple ways you can go. If you go over here behind the alley, we'll call that Swan's Way because we passed Mr. Swan's house. There's another way, the Guermantes Way. If you go this way, I think one of the books further in this series is called the Guermantes Way. I struggled with the pronunciation for a lot of these. I had to look it up. There's one character, if you say the name like phonetically, it's like this, but how you pronounce it in French is like Vejuan, Vejuan. I would never would have got that. I never. So I struggled with the pronunciation, but it was fun to learn, and probably butchered some of it. So try not to say any of the French stuff. French is a beautiful language, though, really beautiful. Yeah, this is like 8, 9, 10 book series, something crazy. I don't know if I'll continue because it was just it was very challenging. This was a very tough read. Not that it's tough like you don't understand what's happening. It's just kind of boring in a lot of places. Kind of tough to get through. Like I said, the first couple of chapters, I was enraptured, but unfortunately, it never really hit that high point again. Like this part of the book was amazing, and then all the rest of this, I was waiting and waiting for that beautiful moment to hit, and it just didn't quite hit. Maybe I wasn't in the right headspace. I don't know. I would say this is definitely one of the most beautiful books I've ever read. I've heard book 2 is like the best book, so it's like, I really want to get book 2, but I know I'm in for a challenge. So I do want to read challenging books this year. It's one of my goals. And speaking of this, I'm about halfway through Les Miserables. How you pronounce it? Very challenging as well. Beautiful, absolutely beautifully written, but it's almost like a mirror of Swan's Way. Like the first chunk of the book is so good, and then like I'm about right here or so, and it's not quite been as good. That first 25% was so good, and then it hasn't hit that high note again. So I'm struggling with this one. I started reading Swan's Way, I think in like November. That's how long it took me. It's taken me months just to read a couple chapters at a time. But it's going to be a very French year. It's going to be a very French February because I have a few other French authors that I really want to get to. But, this, when I complete this, man, this might be the biggest book I've ever read. Crazy. All right. Long video. Appreciate you guys all being here. Thank you. I'll try to do one of these every month, but my daughter will be here in a couple weeks, so it's going to get crazy at my house. All right. Thanks for watching, guys. See ya.